Oh, just sit in the storage room, we need this area for real clients, my brother said with a smug grin. Then his secretary rushed in, Sir, the CEO of Evercrest Capital is here. I stood up and said, That's me. My family called me the disappointment, even as I secretly built a multi-billion-dollar empire. Can you believe it? They shut me out, only to come crawling back a decade later, desperate for my help. And oh boy, did they get a surprise when they found out who I really was. Growing up in Connecticut, in the shadow of Wilson Enterprises, my life was a constant battle for recognition. My older brother, Nathan, now 42, was always Dad's golden boy, paraded around the office as the company's future. Kyle, 40, easily charmed clients with his golf skills, while Brandon, 37, was the quiet tech whiz. Then there was me, Audrey Wilson. From the moment I could read, I was devouring Dad's financial statements at the kitchen table. By 12, I was pointing out supply chain inefficiencies no one else noticed. My father would just ruffle my hair, call me smart cookie, and then completely ignore my suggestions. Business isn't really for girls, princess, he told me when I was 14, after I'd created a detailed analysis on why we should expand into healthcare. That same week, Nathan's half-baked idea about sports equipment manufacturing lost the company $2 million, but Dad just shrugged it off as a learning experience. Despite the blatant favoritism, I kept pushing. I truly believed that merit would eventually win out. I worked 80-hour weeks at Wilson Enterprises through my 20s, transforming our outdated accounting systems, landing our first international clients, and boosting my division's profitability by 43%. Then came the board meeting that changed everything. Dad was turning 65, and he announced his succession plan. Despite all my accomplishments, my education, and the numbers that clearly showed my divisions outperforming all others, he named Nathan as his successor. Wilson Enterprises has always been led by a Wilson man, he explained afterward, not even meeting my eyes. That's just tradition, Audrey. You'll still have an important role. That important role turned out to be working under Nathan, who promptly reassigned all my major clients to himself and Kyle. The final insult came when he moved me from my executive office to a converted supply closet, claiming client-facing employees need the window offices. I resigned the next day. No dramatic confrontation, no tearful goodbye. I just placed my resignation letter on my father's desk before he arrived and walked out. The only person who tried to stop me was Melissa, Nathan's secretary, who had always been kind. They don't deserve you, she whispered as I carried my small box of personal items to my car. But they'll regret this someday. I didn't look back. Instead, I used my savings and a small inheritance from my mother to start fresh. I even reverted to her maiden name, Hayes, partly to avoid the nepotism accusations that had followed me at business school, but mostly to ensure my success or failure would be entirely my own. Evercrest Capital started in a tiny office, just me and two hungry recent graduates who believed in my vision. We specialized in identifying struggling but fundamentally sound manufacturing businesses, providing capital and restructuring expertise to turn them around. Within 5 years, we were managing a portfolio worth over $500 million. By year 8, we'd crossed the billion-dollar threshold and moved into our sleek headquarters in Manhattan. All the while, I kept my success a strict secret from my family. My executive team understood that any mention of Evercrest to the Wilsons would result in immediate termination. I wasn't hiding out of shame, I was building something that couldn't be dismissed as luck or nepotism. I followed Wilson Enterprises from afar, through industry publications and financial filings. After a strong start under Nathan's leadership, riding the momentum of initiatives I had started, the company began a steady decline. Bad investments, lost clients, outdated technology, all symptoms of leadership more concerned with appearances than fundamentals. Then, 3 weeks ago, I received the news that my father had suffered a heart attack. He survived, but the event had triggered a cascade of problems for the company. Key investors pulled out upon learning of his health issues, and creditors were circling. Wilson Enterprises, the company my father had built over 50 years, was weeks away from bankruptcy. My first instinct was to let it burn. They had made their choice a decade ago. But something, perhaps my mother's voice in my head, reminding me that family is family, made me hesitate. I instructed my team to gather intelligence on Wilson's financial situation. What they found was worse than I imagined. My brothers had nearly run the company into the ground through a combination of incompetence and hubris. They were desperately searching for investors to inject emergency capital. And ironically, Evercrest Capital was on their short list of potential saviors, not because they knew of my connection, but because we had developed a reputation for successful manufacturing turnarounds. When an email invitation to a Wilson family business emergency meeting appeared in my personal inbox, I decided to attend. Not as the CEO of Evercrest Capital, but simply as Audrey, the forgotten Wilson daughter. I would see for myself whether anything was worth saving. The email from Nathan's assistant was formal and impersonal. Your presence is requested at Wilson Enterprises headquarters for a family business discussion on Friday, April 15th at 10 a.m. Please confirm your attendance. No, we miss you or hope you're well. Not even a personal signature. Just a corporate summons after 10 years of silence. I showed the email to Diane, my COO and closest confidant, in my corner office overlooking Central Park. You're not actually considering going, are you? She asked, eyebrows raised. After everything they did? I swiveled in my chair, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. I'm curious. Curious is reading their financial statements, which we've already done. This is masochism, Diane said, perching on the edge of my desk. They're going to try to guilt you into giving them money you earned despite them, not because of them. Maybe, I conceded. But I want to see it with my own eyes. The company, Dad, all of it. Diane softened. And you're going as just Audrey, not as the CEO who could buy their company with her quarterly bonus? Exactly, I said. I want to see how they treat me when they think I have nothing to offer. After confirming my attendance, I spent the week preparing emotionally for the reunion. I chose my outfit carefully, an understated charcoal theory pantsuit that cost more than Nathan's first car but didn't broadcast its price tag. I wore minimal jewelry, just my mother's simple gold wedding band on a chain around my neck. The drive back to Connecticut was a journey through memories, the exit off I-95 where Dad would always stop for ice cream on summer drives, the high school where I was valedictorian but my brother's mediocre sports achievements still garnered more family celebration, the coffee shop where I drafted my resignation letter a decade ago. Wilson Enterprises headquarters looked smaller than I remembered. The receptionist didn't recognize me. I had to sign in as a visitor and wait for an escort. I sat on the same uncomfortable lobby chairs that Dad had refused to replace, despite my suggestions that they created a poor first impression. They're vintage, he'd insisted. Shows we have history. Now they were just shabby. The elevator ride up was awkward. I shared it with two young employees who spoke in hushed tones about another round of layoffs and the emergency investor meeting tomorrow. They didn't ask who I was, and I didn't volunteer the information. Kyle was the first brother I encountered, hurrying down the hallway with a phone pressed to his ear. He did a double take, muttered, "Got to go," into his phone, and pasted on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Audrey, wow, it's been a while. He gave me an awkward side hug. You look corporate. Hello, Kyle, I said coolly. Yes, it has been a while. 10 years, to be exact. He had the decency to look embarrassed. Right. Well, Nathan's running around like crazy preparing for tomorrow. Big potential investors coming. Could save the whole business. He checked his watch. Speaking of which, I should. Don't let me keep you, I said coolly. Brendan was next, emerging from what used to be the IT department. He'd aged more than I expected, premature gray streaking his temples. Unlike Kyle, he seemed genuinely pleased to see me. Audrey. He gave me a real hug. I can't believe you came. It's really good to see you. Thanks, Brendan. How have you been? His smile faltered. Oh, busy trying to keep our systems from falling apart while the budget keeps shrinking. He lowered his voice. It's bad, worse than they're admitting. Before he could elaborate, Nathan's voice boomed down the hallway. Well. Little sis has decided to grace us with her presence. Nathan had gained weight, his once athletic frame now soft around the middle. He'd lost some hair, too, though he'd attempted to hide it with an unfortunate comb-over. The tailoring of his suit suggested he still thought he wore the same size as a decade ago. Hey, little sis, he said. So, I gathered, I replied. What's the situation? Nathan waved dismissively. Nothing for you to worry about. Just a temporary cash flow issue. Once we secure this new round of funding, everything will be back on track. I could smell the whiskey on his breath at 11 a.m. Some things hadn't changed. Dad's expecting us all for dinner tonight at the house, he continued. 6. Don't be late. You know how he hates waiting for dinner. With that, he was gone, barking orders at a harried-looking assistant as he disappeared into the conference room. My father's house, the sprawling colonial where we grew up, seemed preserved in amber. The same furniture, the same paintings, even the same family photos from before I left. As if time had stopped the day I walked away. Dad looked frail, his once commanding presence diminished by age and illness. Still, when he saw me, something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps relief. Audrey, he said simply, opening his arms. I hugged him, noting how thin he felt beneath his cardigan. "Hi, Dad. You look successful," he observed, studying my face. "I am," I replied, offering nothing more. Dinner was a stilted affair. Nathan dominated the conversation with optimistic projections about tomorrow's investor meeting and the future of Wilson Enterprises once this minor setback was resolved. Kyle nodded along enthusiastically, while Brendan pushed food around his plate. Dad said little, watching us all with tired eyes. I excused myself early, claiming jet lag despite having only driven from New York. As I headed upstairs to my old bedroom, preserved like a museum exhibit to my teenage self, I overheard Nathan and Dad in Dad's study. "Evercrest Capital is our best shot," he was saying. Their representatives sounded interested. "If they invest, the others will follow." "And if they don't?" my father asked, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. "Don't think like that, Dad. We'll get the money, I promise." I paused outside the doorway, tempted to reveal myself then and there. Instead, I continued to my room, sitting on the edge of my childhood bed and contemplating my next move. Later that night, unable to sleep, I wandered downstairs for water and found my brothers in an impromptu strategy session in the kitchen. They fell silent when I entered. "Don't stop on my account," I said, filling a glass from the tap. "Just business stuff," Kyle said quickly. "Nothing that would interest you." I smiled tightly. "You'd be surprised what interests me these days." After I left, I lingered in the hallway, listening. "Do you think we should involve her tomorrow?" Brandon asked. "She always had a good head for numbers." "Absolutely not," Nathan replied sharply. "The last thing we need is her amateur input scaring off Evercrest. They're our last hope." I smiled to myself. I woke before dawn, my body still operating on my usual schedule despite the unfamiliar surroundings. I dressed methodically, silk blouse, tailored pants, and a casual blazer to conceal the power suit beneath. I secured my mother's ring around my neck and applied minimal makeup, enough to look professional but not enough to signal I was trying to impress anyone. By 7 a.m., I was at Wilson Enterprises, watching the frantic preparations from the periphery. Staff rushed around, adjusting furniture in the main conference room, testing the projector, and arranging platters of pastries that looked far more expensive than the company could afford right now. I approached Brandon, who was fiddling with the presentation laptop. "Need any help?" He jumped slightly. "Oh, Audrey, didn't see you there." "I'm pretty good with PowerPoint these days," I offered. Brandon hesitated, glancing toward Nathan's office. "I should probably let me just take a look," I said, sliding into the chair beside him. The presentation was a disaster. Inconsistent formatting, typos, and key financial projections, and worst of all, fundamentally flawed analysis of the company's turnaround potential. "Brandon, these projected growth numbers don't align with your current manufacturing capacity," I pointed out. "And this slide about future markets contradicts the data on slide 7. "Really?" He frowned, looking closer. I told Nathan those projections seemed optimistic, but he insisted. "What's going on here?" Nathan appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand. "Brandon, why isn't the presentation ready?" "I was just helping him polish a few things," I explained. "There are some inconsistencies in the financial." "We don't need your help," Nathan cut me off. "This presentation has been vetted by actual financial professionals." I bit my tongue, knowing any defense of my qualifications would reveal too much. "Just trying to contribute." "The best way you can contribute is by staying out of the way," Nathan said. "The investors will be here in an hour, and we need everything perfect." Perfect was certainly not the word I would use for their preparation. As the morning progressed, I watched board members and additional potential investors arrive. Most were older men in conservative suits who barely glanced my way. A few nodded politely when introduced, but it was clear they viewed me as irrelevant to the proceedings. The conference room transformed into a buzzing hub of activity. Name placards were arranged around the massive oak table, all bearing names of people who apparently mattered more than me. At 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled start, Nathan approached me as I reviewed notes near the refreshment table. "Oh, Audrey," he said with a dismissive glance. "We need these seats for the real stakeholders. Why don't you sit in the storage room? We'll fill you in later." My expression remained neutral despite the familiar sting. "The storage room? It's been converted to a small office," he explained impatiently. "There's even a chair. Melissa will show you." Kyle, standing nearby, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Brandon actively avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by his tablet screen. Melissa, Nathan's long-suffering secretary, gave me an apologetic look as she led me down a hallway to what was indeed a glorified closet. A metal folding chair sat next to a dusty desk piled with old catalogs and forgotten office supplies. "I'm so sorry, Miss Wilson," she whispered. I tried to tell him this was inappropriate, but... "It's fine, Melissa," I assured her. "Actually, it's perfect." She looked confused but nodded and left me alone in the cramped space. The irony wasn't lost on me, billionaire CEO relegated to a storage closet in the company her father built. The room was a time capsule of Wilson Enterprises history, boxes of old product catalogs from the 1980s and 1990s, framed newspaper clippings about company milestones, a dusty plaque commemorating Dad's Entrepreneur of the Year award in 1995. In one corner, I found a box labeled Family, containing old photographs, my high school graduation, where I stood proudly beside my father, the company picnic when I was 16 and had won the Employee Innovation Contest with an inventory management solution that the company still used, my mother, before cancer took her, smiling with her arm around me at my college acceptance. The thin walls allowed me to hear the nervous energy in the conference room. Nathan's voice carried as he rehearsed his opening remarks, sounding less confident with each repetition. I could hear the shuffling of papers and occasional muttered curses as last-minute changes were made to the presentation. Then I discovered something unexpected, a stack of recent financial documents that had apparently been hidden away rather than properly filed. I skimmed through them, my stomach sinking. The situation was far worse than even my team had uncovered. Wilson Enterprises wasn't just struggling, it was on the verge of complete collapse, unpaid vendors, missed loan payments, tax liens, a perfect storm of financial mismanagement. At 10:15, I heard Melissa's heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. She burst into the main conference room. "Sir," she called out breathlessly. "Evercrest Capital's representatives are here. They've just pulled up in front." The room fell silent, then erupted. I stood, removing my casual blazer to reveal the impeccable suit beneath. I checked my reflection in my phone camera, securing a stray strand of hair and straightening my posture. Then I texted my waiting executive team, "Enter in 5 minutes." It was time to emerge from the shadows. I stood in the storage room, listening as Nathan began his introduction to the assembled board members and potential investors. His voice carried that artificial confidence I remembered so well, slightly too loud, slightly too rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us during this exciting time for Wilson Enterprises. While we face some temporary challenges, we're positioned for an unprecedented comeback with the right strategic partners." Through the thin walls, I could hear the rustling of presentation materials being distributed. Kyle chimed in occasionally with enthusiastic affirmations, while Brandon's quieter voice explained technical details when prompted. The board members' questions grew increasingly pointed. "These revenue projections seem extremely optimistic given your current production capabilities," noted one. "Could you explain the discrepancy between these figures and last quarter's actual performance?" asked another. Nathan's answers became more defensive, his explanations more convoluted. The room's energy was shifting. I could feel the potential investors' interest waning with each unconvincing response. Then came the moment that changed everything. The door to the conference room burst open. I heard Melissa's breathless voice, "Sir, Evercrest Capital's CEO is here." An expectant hush fell over the room. I imagined them all turning toward the main entrance, waiting for the arrival of the financial savior they'd pinned their hopes on. I counted to 5, took a deep breath, and opened the storage room door. The silence that greeted my entrance was absolute. 20 faces turned to me in confusion, then shock as understanding slowly dawned. Nathan stood frozen mid-gesture at the head of the table, presentation remote dangling from his hand. "Sorry I'm late," I said calmly, walking to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. I was reviewing some interesting financial documents in the storage room where I was asked to wait. Nathan recovered first, his face contorting in confusion. "Audrey, what are you doing?" "We're in the middle of an important meeting, waiting for Hayes from Evercrest Capital." I smiled, placing my business card on the table and sliding it toward the center. That would be me. Audrey Hayes. I reverted to my mother's maiden name when I started my company. One of the board members, Mr. Fitzgerald, who had been with the company since my father's early days, picked up my card. His eyes widened as he read it. "Audrey Wilson is Audrey Hayes, the Audrey Hayes, CEO of Evercrest Capital?" I nodded, removing my company ID from my pocket and placing it beside the card. "The very same." The room erupted. Kyle's mouth literally hung open. Brandon stared at me with a mixture of shock and, was that, admiration? The board members whispered urgently to one another, some looking impressed, others concerned. Nathan's face had drained of color. "This is some kind of joke," he stammered. "You can't be, but you've been, what, working as a secretary somewhere all these years?" After I left Wilson Enterprises, I interrupted. I founded Evercrest with my savings and a small inheritance from Mom. We've grown exponentially year over year for the past decade. Forbes featured me last month, actually. The invisible billionaire, they called me, due to my preference for privacy. Nathan attempted to regain control of the room. Everyone, let's take a short break. Audrey, I need to speak with you privately. I don't think so, I said, my voice firm. I'm here as an invited potential investor, and I'd like to continue this meeting. I turned to the board. If that's acceptable to you? Mr. Fitzgerald nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Several other board members murmured agreement. Excellent, I said, opening my portfolio. Now, I've reviewed the materials you provided to my team, as well as some additional documents I found while waiting in storage. I have several concerns I'd like to address. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically dissected the company's financial situation, pointing out the mismanagement, poor strategic decisions, and accounting irregularities that had brought Wilson Enterprises to the brink of bankruptcy. I was professional but unsparing, backing every criticism with specific examples and data. The European expansion 3 years ago consumed 40% of available capital but has yet to generate positive returns, I noted. The Miller account was lost due to repeated quality control failures that weren't addressed despite multiple warnings. And the company has been operating with outdated manufacturing technology while the executive suite was renovated twice in 5 years. Nathan's face grew increasingly red as I spoke. When I finished, he exploded. This is ridiculous. You come back after abandoning the family. Nathan, Kyle said quietly, maybe we should listen. No! Nathan slammed his hand on the table. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's been gone. She's an outsider. Actually, Brandon interjected, surprising everyone. Everything she said is accurate. I've been trying to raise these same issues for years. The room fell silent again. Then, from the doorway, came a voice I immediately recognized. Let her speak, Nathan. My father stood there, looking older and frielier than he had at dinner, but with a commanding presence that had built Wilson Enterprises from nothing. He walked slowly to an empty chair, nodded for me to continue. Thank you, I said, acknowledging him with a slight nod before addressing the room again. Despite these challenges, I believe Wilson Enterprises has a solid foundation worth saving. The brand still has value. The core product line remains competitive. The workforce is skilled and loyal. I laid out my proposal. Evercrest would provide emergency capital in exchange for a controlling interest. There would be a restructuring of leadership, with performance-based metrics determining who stayed in management roles. The company would refocus on its most profitable product lines while modernizing its manufacturing capabilities. This isn't a hostile takeover, I clarified. It's a rescue operation, but it requires acknowledging reality and accepting significant changes. Nathan scoffed. So you want us to hand over the company Dad built to you, after you walked away? I didn't walk away, Nathan. I was pushed out. You moved me to a closet, very much like the one you put me in today. I met his gaze steadily. But this isn't about the past. It's about whether Wilson Enterprises has a future. Kyle, always the peacemaker, attempted to mediate. Maybe we should consider Audrey's proposal. We do need the capital, and her track record speaks for itself. Brandon nodded in agreement. The company needs help. We all know it. Nathan looked to our father, clearly expecting him to back him up as he always had. Dad, tell them this is crazy. We can't let an outsider take control, even if she is family. Dad was quiet for a long moment, looking between us with tired eyes. For 10 years, he finally said, I've watched this company decline under your leadership, Nathan. I defended you, made excuses, convinced myself things would turn around, but they haven't. He turned to me. And for those same 10 years, I followed your success from afar. Read every article about Evercrest, tracked every acquisition, kept a file of everything you've accomplished without the Wilson name or connections. This revelation stunned me. He'd been watching my career all along. You were always the one with the real vision, Dad continued. The drive, the discipline. I was wrong to overlook you because of tradition or gender or whatever foolish reason I told myself. He looked around the table. We should listen to Audrey, not because she's family, but because she's earned the right to be heard. The room was utterly silent as the weight of his words settled over everyone. Nathan looked as though he'd been slapped. Kyle appeared relieved. Brandon wore an expression that said, finally. I maintained my professional demeanor, though inside, emotions threatened to overwhelm me. Thank you, I said simply. I'll need complete access to all financial records and operations before making a final decision. My team is waiting outside and can begin the assessment immediately. I'll require an answer on my terms within 48 hours. I stood, gathering my materials. This meeting is adjourned for now. I suggest everyone take time to consider what's truly best for the company's future. As I walked out, board members and investors parted to let me pass, several nodding respectfully. Nathan remained frozen at the head of the table, his presentation forgotten. Kyle followed me, already trying to establish himself as my ally. Brendan hung back but gave me a small thumbs up when our eyes met. At the door, Melissa waited with a smile. As I passed, she whispered, "That was badass, Ms. Hayes." Indeed, it was. The Montclair Hotel's presidential suite had been transformed into Evercrest's temporary command center. When I entered, my executive team, Diane, Marcus, and Raj, looked up expectantly from their laptops. "So," Diane asked, searching my face, "how did our little surprise go over?" I kicked off my heels, dropping onto the nearest sofa. "About as well as you'd expect when you reveal to your estranged family that you're secretly a billionaire who could buy their failing company with pocket change." "That good?" Marcus grinned. Nathan looked like he was having a stroke, I admitted, feeling a mixture of vindication and unexpected guilt. "Dad actually defended me. Said he'd been following my career all along." "Seriously?" Diane raised an eyebrow. "The same dad who passed you over for being female?" I shrugged, the emotional complexity of the day finally hitting me. People are complicated. Once my team dispersed to begin their preliminary assessment, I allowed myself a moment alone. 10 years of proving myself, of building something from nothing, had culminated in today's revelation. The victory should have felt sweeter than it did. My phone began lighting up with notifications. Nathan had tried calling 3 times. Kyle had sent a rambling, sycophantic text about always believing in me and being excited about our new partnership. Brendan's message was simpler, "I'm sorry. You were always the smartest one. Let me know how I can help." Dad hadn't reached out. I ignored them all, staring out at the Connecticut skyline I'd left behind a decade ago. The satisfaction I'd anticipated felt hollow in my chest, mixed with complicated grief for what might have been if things had been different. Diane found me there an hour later, still contemplating the view. "The preliminary numbers are even worse than we thought," she reported. "They've been cooking the books for at least 2 years. Classic case of hiding declining revenue with creative accounting." "Could criminal charges be involved?" I asked. "Possibly. It's more incompetence than malice, from what I can tell, but the SEC might see it differently." I nodded, still distracted. "What would you do, Diane, as a purely business decision?" She considered the question carefully. "Objectively, I'd walk away. There are better investment opportunities with less emotional complication. The Wilson name isn't worth what it once was." "But unless?" I prompted. "Unless objectively, it's your family, Audrey. Despite everything." She sat beside me. "But that doesn't mean you owe them salvation. There's a difference between forgiveness and setting yourself on fire to keep others warm." A knock at the door interrupted us. The hotel staff announced a visitor, Samuel Wilson. Dad looked even more fragile in the elegant hotel surroundings than he had in the boardroom. He stood awkwardly in the entryway, declining a seat when offered. "I won't stay long," he said. "I just needed to speak with you privately." Diane excused herself, leaving us alone. "Impressive operation you've built," Dad observed, gesturing to the laptops and documents spread across the suite. "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. "I'm sorry, Audrey," he finally said. "For 10 years ago. For all of it." I'd imagined this moment countless times, rehearsed what I would say, the accusations I would level. Now, faced with his genuine contrition, those prepared speeches evaporated. "Why?" I asked simply. "Was it really just because I'm a woman?" He shook his head, looking ashamed. "That was part of it, outdated thinking I was raised with. But mostly it was fear. You are so much more capable than your brothers, so much more like me than any of them. I was afraid you'd build something better than I had. Make my legacy seem small in comparison." He gave a sad laugh. "And then you went and did exactly that anyway." "I didn't do it to spite you," I said quietly. "I know. You did it because it's who you are. A builder. A visionary." He met my eyes directly, like I used to be, before I got caught up in preserving rather than growing. Another silence fell between us. There's something else, he said finally. Something the boys don't know yet. My health situation is more serious than I've let on. The heart attack revealed advanced coronary disease. The doctors give me a year, maybe 2, with aggressive treatment. The news hit me harder than expected. Despite everything, he was still my father. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. I don't tell you this for sympathy, he clarified. But because I need you to understand what I'm asking. Wilson Enterprises isn't just a company to me. It's my life's work. The thought of it disappearing, of nothing remaining to show for 50 years of building. He trailed off, emotion catching in his throat. You want me to save it, I finished for him. I want you to consider saving it, he corrected. Not for Nathan, or Kyle, or even me. But as a legacy worth preserving, flawed though it may be. After he left, I sat alone for a long time, conflicting emotions warring within me. The professionally detached CEO in me said to walk away. Wilson Enterprises was a risky investment at best. The wounded daughter wanted nothing more than to reject their desperate need, to let them face the consequences of pushing me away. But another voice whispered insistently, my mother's. She had always been the compassionate counterbalance to Dad's ruthless pragmatism. Family is family, she would say, even when they disappoint you. I called my therapist, Dr. Levine, for an emergency session. We'd worked together for years, processing the complex grief and anger I carried from my family relationships. It sounds like you're at a crossroads, she observed after I explained the situation, professionally and personally. I built Evercrest to prove them wrong, I admitted. To show my father he made a mistake choosing Nathan over me. Now that I've done that, what's left? Perhaps the more important question. The question lingered with me as I directed my team to conduct a thorough analysis of Wilson Enterprises' financials. They worked through the night, accessing systems with passwords Brendan quietly provided, uncovering the full extent of the company's troubles. By morning, I had the complete picture, and it wasn't pretty. Years of mismanagement had left the once thriving company on life support. Multiple divisions were hemorrhaging money. Client relationships had deteriorated. Talented employees had fled for competitors. Yet, beneath the dysfunction, I could still see the bones of something worth saving. The core manufacturing technology remained sound. Several product lines continued to perform well despite neglect. Most importantly, many loyal employees had stayed, keeping things running through sheer determination. After 48 sleepless hours, I made my decision. I would help save Wilson Enterprises, but on my terms, with clear boundaries between family and business. 3 days after my dramatic revelation, I returned to Wilson Enterprises with my full executive team. We arrived precisely at 9 a.m., striding through the lobby like a tactical unit. The employees whispered as we passed, word of my true identity having spread throughout the company. The boardroom had been prepared for our arrival, fresh flowers, premium coffee service, presentation materials meticulously arranged. Nathan stood stiffly near the head of the table, clearly uncertain of his role in this new paradigm. Kyle hovered nearby, smiling too broadly. Brendan waited quietly by the projection equipment, looking more at ease than I'd seen him in years. The board members filed in, followed by my father, who took a seat to the side, present but deliberately not at the head of the table. Good morning, I began once everyone was seated. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting on such short notice. My team has completed our preliminary assessment of Wilson Enterprises' financial position and operations. Today, I'll present our findings and a proposed path forward. For the next hour, I laid out in meticulous detail exactly what had gone wrong with the company and when. I was professional but unflinching, identifying specific decisions that had contributed to the decline. Nathan squirmed as I highlighted his European expansion failure. Kyle looked at the floor when I mentioned the loss of 3 major clients under his sales leadership. The company currently has negative cash flow of approximately $2.3 million per month, I concluded. At this burn rate, without intervention, Wilson Enterprises will be insolvent within 45 days. A heavy silence fell over the room. However, I continued, we believe the company can be saved with immediate, decisive action. I outlined our proposed turnaround plan. Evercrest would provide emergency capital of $50 million in exchange for 60% ownership. There would be a complete restructuring of the executive team, based on merit rather than family connections. And profitable divisions would be sold or shuttered. Manufacturing would be modernized with state-of-the-art technology. Additionally, I said, looking directly at the board, I will require installation as chairperson, with full authority to implement necessary changes without interference. Nathan stood abruptly. This is outrageous. You're talking about a hostile takeover of a family business. I'm talking about saving a family business that you've run into the ground, I replied calmly. The alternative is bankruptcy within weeks. Your choice. We can find other investors, he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. Can you? I raised an eyebrow. In time, with these financials? Be my guest. Mr. Fitzgerald, the senior board member, cleared his throat. Nathan. Perhaps we should consider Miss Hayes's, Ms. Wilson's, offer seriously. The timeline she's presented aligns with our own projections. Nathan looked around for support but found little. Even Kyle was studiously examining his coffee cup. This is still a family company, Nathan said desperately. Dad, tell them. All eyes turned to our father, who had remained silent throughout the presentation. He looked older than his years as he slowly rose to his feet. When I founded Wilson Enterprises, he began, his voice steadier than I expected, I had nothing but determination and a belief that I could build something worthwhile, something that would last beyond me. He looked around the room. Somewhere along the way, I confused preserving my control with preserving the company itself. He turned to Nathan. Son, I did you no favors making you CEO before you were ready. I set you up to fail because I couldn't let go properly. Then to me, and Audrey, I failed you by not recognizing your talents when they were right in front of me. The room was utterly silent. This company bears our name, he continued. But its future matters more than our pride. If Audrey and her team can save what we've built, give employees security, and restore Wilson Enterprises to something we can be proud of, then we should be grateful, not defensive. Nathan stared at our father in disbelief. You're taking her side, after everything I've done? This isn't about sides, Nathan, Dad interrupted firmly. It's about survival. While Nathan processed this betrayal, Kyle, ever the opportunist, stepped forward. I think we should accept Audrey's offer. I'm happy to continue in whatever capacity would be most helpful. Brandon nodded in agreement. The plan makes sense. It's our best option. Backed into a corner, Nathan requested a private conversation with our father. They disappeared into an adjacent office while the board members murmured among themselves. Diane leaned close to me. That went better than expected. It's not over yet, I cautioned. Nathan won't surrender control easily. 20 minutes later, Nathan and Dad returned. Nathan's face was flushed, but his demeanor had changed. After discussing the situation with our father, he announced stiffly, I've decided to accept Evercrest's offer, with one condition, I remain on the executive team in some capacity. I considered this request. Keeping Nathan involved would be complicated, but firing him outright might create unnecessary resistance. You can remain as VP of Client Relations, I decided. Your institutional knowledge of long-term clients will be valuable during the transition. However, I added, this position will have clearly defined performance metrics, like every other role in the new structure. Nathan clearly hated the demotion but recognized it was the best offer he would get. He nodded curtly. With that settled, the board voted unanimously to accept Evercrest's investment. The following weeks were intense. My team and I worked 16-hour days implementing the turnaround plan. We conducted a comprehensive audit of every department, identified salvageable operations, and made difficult decisions about what had to go. The first executive meeting under the new structure was predictably tense. Nathan sat silently, fuming, as I outlined the changes in reporting structure and accountability standards. Kyle adapted quickly, already trying to position himself as my trusted lieutenant. Brendan seemed relieved to finally have his technical expertise valued appropriately. From now on, I announced, advancement will be based on merit, not family connections. Everyone, including myself, will be held to the same performance standards. Implementation wasn't easy. Longtime employees loyal to Nathan resisted the new processes. Some openly questioned my authority despite my official title. Others were simply resistant to change after years of doing things the Wilson way. Nathan himself engaged in subtle sabotage, forgetting to include me on important client communications, undermining my directives when speaking to his direct reports, spreading rumors about Evercrest's intentions to eventually sell off the company. After catching him in a particularly damaging lie to a major client, I called him into my office, formerly his office, which surely added to his resentment. This stops now, I said, sliding evidence of his sabotage across the desk. I understand this transition is difficult for you. But your behavior is harming the very company you claim to care about. You have no idea what it's like, he seethed, to watch everything Dad built, everything I was supposed to lead, handed over to my little sister who abandoned us. I didn't abandon the company, Nathan. I was pushed out. By you. I let that sink in before continuing. But that's the past. Right now, we have 300 employees depending on us to save their jobs. Can you set aside your ego long enough to help them? Something in my appeal seemed to reach him. Not completely, but enough that his active resistance began to diminish. Kyle, predictably, proved to be a weather vane, pointing whichever way the wind of power blew. Once he realized my leadership was firmly established, he became enthusiastically supportive. His sales skills were genuinely valuable when properly directed and monitored, and he thrived with clear guidelines and accountability. The real surprise was Brandon. Given actual authority and resources, he flourished. His technical innovations streamlined manufacturing processes, saving millions in operational costs. He assembled a talented IT team that modernized our outdated systems, improving efficiency throughout the company. 6 weeks into the restructuring, we faced a crisis. Our largest remaining client, Henderson Medical Supplies, was threatening to take their business to a competitor. The account represented nearly 20% of our current revenue. Losing it would be devastating. Nathan had cultivated the relationship for years, but they were specifically upset about changes we'd implemented to quality control procedures. I scheduled an emergency meeting with our executive team, bringing Nathan, Kyle, and our production manager. We need this account. Nathan stressed before we entered the meeting. Whatever they want, we should give them. Not if it compromises our new standards, I replied. We'll listen, but we won't promise what we can't deliver. The meeting began tensely. Henderson's CEO complained about our unnecessary bureaucracy and threatened to walk unless we returned to the previous arrangements. When Nathan began immediately capitulating, I intervened. Mr. Henderson, I understand your frustration with the changes. Change is difficult for everyone. But let me explain why these new procedures are actually to your benefit. I proceeded to outline how our enhanced quality controls would reduce defect rates, improve consistency, and ultimately save them money on returns and customer complaints. I shared data from other clients who had already seen improvements and presented a cost analysis showing the long-term benefits. Additionally, I added, as a gesture of good faith, we'll extend a 5% discount for the next quarter while we prove the value of these changes. By the end of the meeting, not only had Henderson agreed to stay, but they were considering increasing their order volume. As we left, Nathan grudgingly admitted, that was impressive. I've been trying to get them to increase orders for 3 years. Different approaches work in different situations, I replied, not unkindly. Your relationship with them got us in the door. My data convinced them to stay. It was our first moment of genuine professional respect. The company's turnaround began gaining momentum. Operational costs decreased by 30% through efficiencies and strategic cuts. New clients, attracted by our improved quality and reliability, began signing contracts. Employee morale improved as they saw the company stabilizing. My father attended weekly update meetings, sitting quietly at the back of the room. After one particularly positive session, he asked me to join him for dinner at his house. The family home felt different now, less intimidating, more like a place of faded memories. We sat in the dining room where countless tense family meals had taken place. You've accomplished more in 2 months than Nathan did in 10 years, Dad said without preamble. I had a stronger foundation to start with, I replied, not wanting to deepen the rift between him and Nathan. And a more urgent situation that allowed for dramatic changes. He smiled slightly. Always diplomatic when it counts. Your mother was the same way. The mention of Mom created a moment of shared remembrance between us. I've been thinking about her a lot lately, he admitted, wondering what she would think of all this, of what I did to you. She would have been disappointed, I said honestly. But she also believed in second chances. He nodded, looking down at his barely touched dinner. That's what I'm hoping for. A second chance to be the father you deserved. The words hung between us. I'd like that, I said finally. But it will take time. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I understand. He hesitated, then added, would you consider making these dinners a regular thing? Just a talk. No business. It was a small request, yet somehow monumental in its implications. A first step toward healing what had been broken. I think I can manage that, I agreed. The following week, I instituted a new tradition, family dinner every Sunday evening. Not mandatory, but open to all Wilsons. The first few were awkward, conversation stilted, and carefully avoiding controversial topics. But gradually, something shifted. Nathan brought his wife and teenage sons, who were curious about their badass aunt they'd barely known. Kyle actually prepared a dish rather than bringing store-bought contributions. Brendan showed up early to help set up. During the third such dinner, Nathan made a self-deprecating joke about his failed European expansion. We all froze, unsure how to respond, until I laughed, genuinely laughed, and the tension broke. Soon, everyone was sharing stories of business missteps and lessons learned. For the first time in over a decade, it felt like we might actually become a family again, different from before, with clearer boundaries and expectations, but a family nonetheless. 6 months passed in a blur of strategic decisions, operational changes, and careful rebuilding. What had once seemed impossible was now reality. Wilson Enterprises was not just surviving but beginning to thrive again. The emergency capital infusion had stabilized our finances. Strategic divestment of unprofitable divisions generated additional cash flow. Most importantly, our renewed focus on quality and innovation had restored client confidence and attracted new business. The most significant development came unexpectedly. During a routine review of potential acquisition targets, my Evercrest team identified surprising synergies between our portfolio companies and Wilson Enterprises' core business. What began as a rescue operation evolved into a strategic merger, with Wilson Enterprises becoming the manufacturing arm of a larger, more diversified operation. The day we announced the formal merger was surreal. I stood at the podium in the company atrium, facing employees from both organizations, my family seated in the front row. Today marks not an ending, but a new beginning, I told them. Wilson Enterprises and Evercrest Capital are stronger together than apart, combining century-old manufacturing expertise with cutting-edge financial and operational strategies. I glanced at my father, who nodded slightly, pride evident in his eyes. The company's transformation had catalyzed family transformation as well. Nathan had initially struggled with his diminished role but eventually found his niche in client relationship management, where his natural charisma could shine without the burden of operational leadership. He'd never be my closest confidant, but we had reached a professional détente that seemed impossible months earlier. Kyle thrived in the new structure, his sales talents amplified by proper support systems and accountability. Without the pressure to be something he wasn't, he became more authentic and effective. Brandon experienced the most dramatic change. Given resources and recognition, he developed into an exceptional technical director. We discovered a natural sibling shorthand, often finishing each other's sentences during planning sessions. The bond we might have formed as children began growing in adulthood. Our father attended board meetings regularly despite his health challenges, offering historical context without attempting to control outcomes. His doctors reported surprising improvements in his condition, attributing it to reduced stress and a renewed sense of purpose. The weekly family dinners had evolved from awkward obligations to genuine gatherings. Not always harmonious, we were still Wilsons, after all, but increasingly comfortable. We were learning to be a family defined by more than business. One evening, I encountered Mr. Fitzgerald, the senior board member who had witnessed my humiliation and subsequent triumph at an industry event. I always knew Samuel made the wrong choice, he told me, glass of scotch in hand. Even tried to tell him so at the time. But perhaps it worked out for the best in the end. You built something remarkable on your own terms, without the Wilson legacy as a crutch or a burden. Perhaps, I agreed, though I couldn't help wondering how different things might have been. The most meaningful conversation came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Dad had asked me to help sort through old company documents in his home office, a task that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. I found something you should have, he said, handing me a worn leather portfolio. Inside was a business plan, my business plan, from when I was 16, proposing Wilson Enterprises' expansion into medical equipment manufacturing. The very plan he had dismissed as unrealistic despite its meticulous research and projections. I kept it all these years, he admitted. Sometimes I would take it out and look at it, especially after you left. The medical division you proposed would have positioned us perfectly for the pandemic boom. He shook his head ruefully. Just one of many missed opportunities. We can't change the past, I said, touching the faded pages that represented so much youthful hope and subsequent disappointment. No, he agreed. But I want you to know that I always saw your potential, Audrey. I was just too afraid of being overshadowed to nurture it properly. That was my failure, not yours. Coming from a man who had rarely admitted failure of any kind, the words carried immense weight. Thank you for saying that, I replied simply. Later that week, during our executive leadership meeting, we discussed succession planning, ironically, the very issue that had driven me from the company a decade earlier. We need to establish clear criteria for future leadership, I explained, based on merit, skills, and demonstrated capability, not family connections or seniority. Nathan, who might once have taken this as a personal attack, nodded in agreement. The next generation should earn their positions, he said, glancing at his teenage sons who occasionally interned during school breaks. No shortcuts or assumptions. Exactly, I confirmed. We'll create development tracks for promising employees, family or not, with mentorship, education support, and progressive responsibilities. As the meeting concluded, I found myself reflecting on the journey from storage closet to boardroom. The vindication was sweet, yes, but the healing was the true victory. The ability to lead without anger, to collaborate with my brothers without resentment constantly simmering beneath the surface. I had spent years building Evercrest to prove my worth to a family that had undervalued me. The irony was that true satisfaction came not from proving them wrong, but from creating something that made all our lives better. Success wasn't revenge. It was the freedom to move beyond the need for revenge. That evening, I stood in my office, once my father's, briefly Nathan's, now legitimately mine, looking out at the manufacturing floor where workers moved with renewed purpose. The Wilson name still adorned the building, but its meaning had evolved. No longer a patriarchal kingdom, but a modern enterprise where contribution mattered more than connection. So, what's the lesson in all this? That sometimes being underestimated is your greatest advantage. That building yourself outside the shadow of family expectations can forge a strength no inheritance could provide. That healing doesn't require forgetting the past, but it does require releasing its power to define your future. And perhaps most importantly, that the storage room where they seat you might just offer the perfect vantage point to observe exactly what needs changing, before you emerge to change it all. Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong, or found yourself needing to set boundaries with family in your professional life? Drop a comment below and share your experience. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that being underestimated today doesn't determine their success tomorrow. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's building something so remarkable they can't help but recognize what they almost lost.